Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into a specific stack of material today. A book that really takes on a topic that, well, it's been sparking debates for decades, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Decades.
Our mission here is pretty clear. We want to guide you through this particular source, pull out what it presents as most important nuggets of knowledge, the key details about unidentified flying objects. And there's a heavy focus on Roswell, New Mexico, back in the summer of '47.
That's right. And this material, it doesn't just list incidents. It weaves a narrative. It pulls together historical accounts, alleged witness testimony, some pretty detailed descriptions of supposed craft and, well, occupants,
Occupants, right?
and significant claims about government secrecy. We're really just here to lay out the picture this book paints for you, based entirely on what's inside these pages.
Think of us as your guides then, navigating this specific map of the subject. And interestingly, according to this source, our journey doesn't actually kick off in 1947, even though that's the year most people immediately think of with flying saucers.
Exactly. That's a key point the source makes. It argues that reports of strange things in the sky, well, they're threaded throughout human history, long before we had airplanes. They weren't called UFOs, obviously. But people saw unusual stuff and, interpreted it through the lens of that own time.
So we're talking really ancient history, like pre-science, pre-technology as we know it.
Absolutely. The book points to records from ancient Egypt accounts of huge fiery circles. It even touches on the prophet Ezekiel's vision, the wheel in the middle of a wheel.
Yeah, I know the one.
The source suggests that might be an early attempt to describe something, maybe like a complex craft or even a landing space capsule, just using the language and imagery available back then.
Right. Trying to describe the unknown using familiar terms. Makes sense.
Precisely. And this pattern, it just continues. The source mentions ancient Assyrians seeing flying bulls, Greeks and Arabs talking about flying horses, Persians with flying carpets. Romans apparently reported flying shields and spears in the sky.
Flying shields.
And as beliefs changed, so did the interpretations. Christian Europe started seeing fiery crosses. Later, Renaissance time, early balloon experiments are starting.
Yeah.
And people report seeing these large floating globes, things that looked like balloons.
So the phenomena might have been consistent, or at least perceived consistently as something unusual, but the labels changed with the times.
That's the argument the source seems to be building, yeah. But then, by the late 1800s, early 1900s, the descriptions in the historical record, they start sounding a bit more, technological. Flying spindles, cigars, airships moving at incredible speeds. The book gives some really specific examples that stand out.
Okay, let's look at those. What sightings from this earlier period does the source really highlight?
Well, there's one report it cites from the Monthly Weather Review, March 1904, a Lieutenant Frank H. Schofield aboard the USS Supply. He and his crew reported seeing 3 enormous luminous objects over the Atlantic.
Enormous how?
He described the largest as having a diameter 6 times that of the sun, and they were moving together in unison.
6 times the sun. That's hard to even picture. Moving together.
Moving in unison, yes, that's the report cited. And then there's another account, this one from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada Journal. March 1913, Professor Chant compiled multiple reports from observers along the U.S.-Canadian border.
Oh.
They saw a huge luminous body moving east to west. It was described as being made of 3 or 4 parts with tails, and it was followed by second and third groupings of lights. The observers called it an aerial fleet maneuvering.
Aerial fleet maneuvering. Even back then, that language suggests something organized, deliberate, not just a natural phenomenon.
It really does, and this kind of thing continued. During World War I and World War II, pilots reported these things called Foo Fighters.
Ah, yes, the Foo Fighters.
Unexplained luminous objects. Both sides often thought they were the enemy's secret weapon.
But the source notes that neither side ever actually claimed them, right?
Correct. Nobody took credit. And the source makes a really interesting observation here. It suggests the frequency of UFO sightings seems to increase almost in direct proportion to our own scientific and technological development.
How so?
Well, more radar means we detect more, sure. More air travel, more eyes in the sky. Astronauts report encounters. Our ability to see increases, yes. But the source hints the phenomenon itself might be responding to our technological leaps.
So it's not just that we got better cameras or whatever. Their appearance seems linked to our activity.
That's the hypothesis presented in this material. The source argues that maybe non-earthly intelligences, if they exist, might be monitoring us, especially our rapid tech growth. And that, according to this book, brings us right up to the year everything seemed to explode.
1947, the year of the flying saucer.
Exactly. June 24th, 1947. That's seen as the start of the modern era, mostly because of Kenneth Arnold's sighting, 9 objects over Mount Rainier.
And his description, like saucers skipping on water, gave us the name.
It did. But this source, it points out that the real hotspot that summer wasn't just Washington state, it was New Mexico and Arizona.
And the source connects that location specifically to something.
Oh, yeah. It ties it directly to the heavy concentration of post-war cutting-edge defense technology down there. You had Los Alamos, right, Atomic Research Central,
Right.
White Sands Missile Range for rocketry, and crucially, the 509th Bomb Group based at Roswell, the world's only combat-trained atom bomb unit at the time.
Okay, I see the connection.
The authors argue, look, if non-earthly intelligences were watching Earth, wouldn't they be most interested in the places where we were making huge leaps in technology, especially destructive tech?
It's a chilling kind of logic, but yeah, like checking out the labs where the big, dangerous experiments are happening.
That's the reasoning presented. And according to this material, the sightings in New Mexico and Arizona during June and July of 47 were, well, numerous and quite detailed.
Okay, let's hear some examples from the source. What did people report seeing?
Well, just the day after Arnold's famous sighting, June 25th, down in Silver City, New Mexico, a dentist, Dr. Sensenbauer, reported a saucer-shaped object, about half the size of the full moon, moving south.
Half the size of the moon. That's big.
Yeah. Next day, June 26th, near the Grand Canyon area, a Dr. Leon Oettinger and 3 others saw a large silver ball-shaped object moving at high speed.
So different shapes reported right away: saucer, ball.
Yes, exactly. And June 27th seems to have been particularly busy. An electrician near Tintown, Arizona, John Petch, saw a disc-shaped object that looked like it came down to Earth.
Landed or crashed.
The report cited just as appeared to come to Earth. Same day, Major George B. Wilcox in Warren, Arizona, reported seeing 8 or 9 discs, perfectly spaced, high speed, and they had this sort of wobbling motion.
8 or 9? Flying in formation, wobbling? That's a lot of detail.
It is. And also on the 27th, this is interesting, a white disc, glowing like an electric light bulb, was reported over Pope, New Mexico. Minutes later, the source says, the same or a very similar object was sighted simultaneously over White Sands Missile Range by a captain and over San Miguel by another witness.
Whoa, wait. 3 sightings, same object, minutes apart, over a pretty wide area.
That's the claim presented in the source, yes. And it highlights that the commanding officer at White Sands initially denied any rocket launches happening around that time. Later, the official explanation became a daytime meteorite, supposedly to avoid panic.
Okay, so the source is pointing out a pattern here. Sightings, then official denial or downplaying.
That's definitely a theme the source wants you to notice. Then you had, let's see, June 28th, a ball of fire near Alamogordo reported by Captain Devin. June 29th, Army Air Force pilots searched near Cliff, New Mexico for a fallen object. Found nothing, but reported a curious odor.
A curious odor. That's a strange, specific little detail, isn't it?
It really is. Also on the 29th, a team of naval rocket experts, Dr. C.J. Zahn's team at White Sands, watched a silvery disk doing maneuvers at high altitude. Then June 30th, Albuquerque, a railroad worker named Price and his neighbor saw 13 silvery disks change course abruptly.
13 discs, changing course together, seen by multiple people.
That's the report cited. And same day, Tucumcari, New Mexico, Mrs. Helen Hardin described a flying saucer, again about half the size of the full moon, slight yellow tint, and it had a whirling motion as it got near the ground.
Whirling. Oh.
July 1st, Albuquerque, again, a bluish disc zigzagging, seen by a Chamber of Commerce executive. Then 7 reports over northern Mexico between July 1st and 6th. And then, critically for this story, July 2nd, Mr. and Mrs. Dan Wilmot in Roswell. They saw a large glowing object pass over their house, traveling northwest pretty fast.
And it's that Wilmot sighting in Roswell on July 2nd that leads directly into the main event this book focuses on.
It does. That's the immediate prelude, according to this narrative. The source makes a point of contrasting all these detailed sightings with the known V2 rocket tests. Apparently, there were only tests noted on June 12th and July 3rd around this period.
So not matching up with most of these sighting dates.
Right. And the source really pushes back against the idea that this was all just, auto-induced optical suggestions or mass hysteria kicked off by the Kenneth Arnold report. It argues the sheer volume, the consistency in some descriptions, the multiple witnesses. It suggests something more was going on.
So according to this material, the skies over New Mexico and Arizona were, well, buzzing with reported activity in the summer of '47, leading up to the big Roswell incident.
That's the picture the source paints, yes. The main event, as far as the public record goes, really kicks off with that July 2nd Wilmot sighting the large, glowing object over Roswell.
Okay, then the story jumps forward a few days to July 7th. What happens then, according to this account?
Right, July 7th. A reporter, Johnny McBoyle, at station KSWS in Roswell, he calls Lydia Sleppy. She was the teletype operator at Co-80 in Albuquerque. He wanted her to transmit a story.
And he sounded excited.
Very excited, according to the account. He was reporting that a crashed object, a flying disc, had been found on a nearby ranch.
And this is where things get really dramatic, right? The teletype story.
Oh, absolutely. This part is wild. As Lydia Sleppy starts typing McBoyle's report onto the teletype network, just a few sentences in, the machine just stops, dead.
Stops by itself.
By itself. She tells McBoyle it's cut off. He sounds stressed on the phone, like maybe someone's giving him instructions, and says he'll call her back.
The machine just starts up again.
Yes, all by itself. And it starts receiving a message. The source notes was very formal, very curt, and the sender was unidentified. The message read, "Attention Albuquerque, do not transmit. Repeat, do not transmit this message. Stop communication immediately."
Whoa. A direct order. Anonymous. Stop transmission. That sounds exactly like someone slamming the brakes on the story getting out.
It strongly suggests, as the source presents it, that someone with authority, somewhere, wanted that specific information stopped. Instantly. And this is July 7th. The very next morning, July 8th, Lieutenant Walter Haut, the public information officer at the Roswell Army Air Base.
He issues the press release. The famous one.
The one everyone knows, yeah. The release announces that the 509th Bomb Group's intelligence office, under a Major J.A. Marcel, had recovered a flying disc.
They actually used the words flying disc.
They did. It said the object was recovered on a local ranch, thanks to the rancher and the sheriff cooperating, and that Major Marcel was flying it to higher headquarters.
And this, of course, caused a massive sensation. Front-page news everywhere. The military captured a flying disc.
Exactly. Huge story. But as the source details very clearly, that excitement lasted, well, less than 24 hours.
Because then came the retraction, the official walkback.
Swift and definitive. Brigadier General Roger M. Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force down in Fort Worth, Texas, he gets alerted. The source also mentions Lieutenant General Hoyt Vandenberg, called Ramey, apparently quite unhappy. Ramey orders the material flown to Fort Worth immediately.
And this is where the official cover story, as alleged by this source, really kicks into gear.
That's precisely the book's central claim. General Ramey holds a press conference. He quickly identifies the material as a weather balloon, specifically one with a radar reflector target.
A weather balloon. Quite a step down from a flying disc.
A huge step down. Major Marcel is brought in, presented to the press in Ramey's office, photographed holding what's displayed as debris from the supposed weather balloon. The narrative officially becomes, "Nothing unusual here, folks, just standard weather equipment. Move along."
So the public story flips 180 degrees almost overnight, from captured disc to mundane balloon, but the source presents this as a deliberate fabrication.
That's a core argument, yes. The book cites Colonel Thomas Jefferson DuBose, who was Ramey's adjutant, his right-hand man at the time. Years later, DuBose apparently stated on the record that the weather balloon story was entirely made up.
Made up.
Specifically designed to put out the fire, as he put it, and get the press off his back. And crucially, DuBose said these were orders from on high. He also confirmed that the real material, the stuff Marcel actually brought from Roswell, was sent on to Wright Field in Ohio for analysis. It wasn't just dismissed as a balloon.
Okay, that's huge if true. DuBose saying the cover story was ordered and the real material was significant enough to be sent elsewhere for analysis.
It's a major piece of the alleged cover-up narrative presented in the source. And the book compiles testimony from multiple people who saw the actual debris, insisting it was nothing like a weather balloon, Major Marcel himself and others. They said the material was incredibly strong.
Strong.
Like you couldn't tear it, you couldn't even dent it apparently, even with a sledgehammer. It would wrinkle up if you crumpled it, but then it would just smooth itself back out like some kind of memory metal or plastic.
Memory metal. That sounds way beyond 1947 weather balloon tech.
It certainly does. The source also includes testimony from Major Marcel's son, Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. He saw some of the material as a boy when his father brought it home briefly.
What did he remember seeing?
He described this thin, metallic foil-like stuff. Tough, he couldn't tear it. Darker than tinfoil, but really lightweight. It wrinkled, but popped back into shape. He also remembered these small beams, like I-beams, with strange symbols on them, and some strong thread-like material, like wire, that wouldn't snap.
And his father told him.
Told him it was classified stuff and that the Army had figured out it was not anything made by us?
Not anything made by us. That's powerful testimony coming from the son who claims he actually handled some of it.
It definitely adds weight to the claim that the material was highly unusual. Then there's the rancher, W.W. Brazel, the guy who found the debris field.
Right, Mac Brazil.
The source quotes people who knew him well, like his neighbors, the Proctors. They said Brazel initially described finding the strangest stuff. He mentioned these small beams with designs on them, kind of like Chinese or Japanese firecracker wrappers, he said, a metal he couldn't cut. And he also mentioned seeing something with a whirling motion as it came down.
But Brazil famously changed his story later, didn't he?
He did, radically. According to the source, after the military held him for about a week under guard, the Proctors claimed Brazel came back and publicly stated, yeah, he guessed it was just a weather balloon, like they told him. He became extremely reluctant to talk about it ever again, reportedly told people, just forget about it. It never happened.
Wow.
The source even recounts witnesses seeing him in town with a military escort, walking right past people he knew like they were strangers. It paints a picture of someone under intense pressure, maybe even threats.
That definitely suggests he was being heavily managed, to put it mildly.
And the source brings in an expert, C.B. Moore. He was a neurologist involved in high-altitude balloon projects back in '47, specifically Project Mogul, which later became another explanation.
Okay, what did Moore say?
Moore is cited stating that the types of balloons they were using then, especially the ones capable of lifting heavy payloads for Project Mogul, weren't made of the kind of materials described by Marcel or Brazel. The really advanced polyethylene balloons didn't come into use until months after July 1947. And none were launched from New Mexico around that specific time anyway. The descriptions just didn't match their projects.
So both the timeline of balloon tech and the description of the material itself contradict the official story, according to this expert cited in the source.
That's the argument the book presents, yes. It also throws in another anecdote. Robert R. Porter. He was apparently on a flight to Fort Worth around the time the debris was being transported. He claimed he was told by others on the plane who were guarding the material, quote, "That's just what it is, a flying saucer, and don't ask any more questions."
Don't ask any more questions. The level of secrecy being alleged here is just intense.
It is, and the source details direct media censorship efforts as part of this alleged cover-up. We already heard about Lydia Sleppy's teletype getting cut off.
Right.
Then there's the owner of KGFL Radio in Roswell, W.E. Whitmore Sr. He reportedly managed to hide Brazel for a bit to get an exclusive interview, but when he tried to broadcast it,
What happened?
the source claims he got calls. One allegedly from the Secretary of the FCC, a Mr. Slowey, another allegedly from U.S. Senator Chavez of New Mexico. Both supposedly threatened his broadcasting license if he didn't kill the story and keep completely silent about it.
Direct threats from the FCC and a U.S. senator. If that's true, that's immense pressure to suppress this specific information.
It certainly implies a very, very high level of concern about this story getting out. Whitmore's son also reportedly saw some of the wreckage his father got from Brazel, the thin foil, the beams with symbols.
Wow.
He later saw the debris field on the ranch blocked off by military police and then saw it later completely cleaned out by the military, like scoured. Gone. So based on all these claims compiled in the source, the Roswell Incident, at least the Brazel Ranch part, involved recovering highly unusual material, followed by a rapid, deliberate, high-level cover-up using intimidation, censorship, the works.
That's the book's primary claim for the Roswell debris field story. But you mentioned this material presents an even more complex picture.
Yes, there's another significant layer presented. The source raises the possibility that the Brazel Ranch was just a debris field, scatter from something that broke apart or malfunctioned, and that the main object, the disc itself, actually came down somewhere else.
Somewhere else. Where?
Specifically, it points to an area west of Socorro, New Mexico, a place known as the Plains of San Agustin.
So the Roswell event, according to this source, might actually involve two separate but linked crash sites, a debris field and a main impact site.
That's the theory explored in this book, yes. And the key alleged witness for this second crash site near Socorro is a man named Barney Barnett.
Okay, who is Barney Barnett?
Described in the source as a respected civil engineer, a World War I veteran. He was working for the Soil Conservation Service out there at the time.
And what did Barnett allegedly see at this supposed second location?
The source details an account he reportedly shared years later, around 1950, with close friends, the Malteses. Barnett claimed he was working out near Magdalena on the plains of San Agustin on July 3, 1947. That's the day after the Wilmot sighting in Roswell.
Okay, how many lines up?
He saw this bright light reflecting off something metallic in the distance, went to investigate, and he found a metallic, disc-shaped object, maybe 25-30 feet across. It looked like it had crashed, split open.
And was he the first one there?
No. According to his accounts cited in the source, there were already other people there. He identified them as an archaeological team, maybe from an Eastern university, possibly the University of Pennsylvania, who happened to be working in the area.
An archaeology team?
Hmm?
At a crashed disc site?
Yeah.
That's unexpected.
Definitely adds a strange twist. And what Barnett claimed he saw next is really the core of this second sight narrative.
Okay, what was it?
He allegedly saw dead bodies, both outside and inside the craft. And he described them as being like humans, but definitely not humans.
Not humans. That's a chilling phrase. What details did he reportedly give about their appearance?
According to the Malteses' recollections, as presented in the source, Barnett described them as having round heads, small eyes that were oddly spaced, no hair at all. They were small, quite small by our standards, but their heads were noticeably large in proportion to their bodies.
The classic gray alien archetype starts to emerge here.
Some similarities, yeah. He also mentioned their clothing, like a one-piece suit, gray, with no visible zippers or buttons or fasteners. He thought they were all males.
Small, large-headed, hairless, oddly spaced eyes, one-piece suits. It's very specific.
Extremely specific. Barnett reportedly said he was close enough to touch them, but he didn't. And then, just like the alleged pattern at the Brazil ranch, the military showed up. Quickly.
And ordered everyone away, told them to keep quiet, let me guess.
Exactly that, according to the source. An Army officer arrived, took charge, told everyone Barnett and the archaeology team to leave immediately, and not to talk about what they'd seen. Framed it as their patriotic duty to stay silent. The same phrase comes up.
The same pattern. Rapid military intervention, silencing witnesses. Did the source offer any corroboration for Barnett's story? His credibility?
Yes, it does include details supporting Barnett's reputation and his presence in that area. Holm Bursom Jr., a bank executive, former mayor, knew Barnett and spoke highly of his honesty. Lee Garner, a former sheriff, remembered Barnett and also recalled an archaeology expedition being out there around that time, thought maybe Michigan or Pennsylvania. J.F. Fleck, Danley, who was Barnett's supervisor at the Soil Conservation Service, called him one of the most honest men I ever knew. Danley even recalled Barnett coming back from the field one day, all excited, saying something like, "You know those flying saucer things everyone's talking about? Well, they're real," and that he'd just seen one. Danley admitted he didn't believe him back then.
Wow, so his boss heard about it right away.
Apparently so. And another person, John Greenwald, confirmed Barnett definitely worked on the plains of San Agustin, known locally as the Flats, which is exactly where the alleged crash happened.
So multiple sources cited vouching for Barnett's character and placing him in the right area at the right time. And Major Marcel, the guy from the Roswell debris part, he apparently mentioned hearing about a separate crash near Socorro later, but couldn't verify it himself.
Right. The source uses Marcel's comment about hearing those rumors to suggest it supports the idea of two separate recovery operations maybe happening simultaneously or close together.
So, the material presents a case for two distinct but related incidents in July 47. The Brazil debris field near Roswell, and this alleged primary crash with occupants near Socorro, witnessed by Barnett and others.
That's the complex scenario the book lays out based on its sources, yes.
Let's take a moment then to compile these alleged descriptions of the occupants and the craft itself. Because the source, as you mentioned, draws on various accounts beyond just Barnett's. What other details emerge? What picture does it paint overall?
Right, and the source does acknowledge up front, look, getting consistent details from anonymous sources or people maybe recalling things years later, it's tricky. But it compiles a range of descriptions. They share some common threads, but there are definitely differences too.
Okay, so besides Barnett's description, small, large, round heads, small spaced eyes, hairless, gray suits. What else does the source cite?
There's information reportedly passed from a coworker named Lamb to Dr. Marcel, Major Marcel's son.
Okay, what did Lamb's account cited in the source add to the picture?
Lemmy allegedly told Dr. Marcel that, yes, they found the main crash object elsewhere and recovered creatures with it. He described two of them being maybe 3.5 to 4 feet tall, bald. Apparently, they were initially alive.
Alive.
Alive, but with their throats badly burned, supposedly from inhaling fumes in the crash. They were reportedly kept alive on respirators for a short time, but died before anyone could, communicate with them.
Wow, okay. That adds a layer about their initial condition. Attempts to keep them alive. What else?
There's Mead Lane, a researcher cited in the book. He had an informant, supposedly a physics professor named Dr. Weisberg, who claimed he got to see and examine the disk itself.
Examine it. What did he allegedly report?
According to this account in the source, the disk was shaped like a turtle's back, had a cabin. Bodies were found inside and outside, and they were seared, like from intense heat. The interior was damaged by heat, too. One body was reportedly found slumped over a control desk covered in gadgets.
Gadgets. And the bodies themselves, according to Weisberg, via Lane.
This source says they resembled humans except for their size, smaller. The interior walls and panels supposedly had symbols or writing on them in a language nobody recognized, looked nothing like anything from Earth. And the craft itself. No visible propulsion, no propeller, no jets, no motor. Weisberg apparently wondered if maybe atmospheric friction heat caused the crash.
Unknown writing, no obvious engine, bodies showing heat damage, adds more pieces.
Then there's another alleged witness cited, Baron Nicholas von Papen. He was supposedly a photographer hired by military authorities to document the damaged saucer.
A photographer, hired by the military for this.
That's his claim, as presented in the source. He said he was taken to an air base, they told him Los Alamos, but he suspected Edwards in California and spent several days photographing the object, inside and out.
And did he report seeing bodies too?
Yes. Von Papen claimed he saw 4 dead bodies strapped into seats inside the craft. He described them as extremely thin, and their height varied, maybe from 2 feet up to 4 feet.
2 to 4 feet tall.
Right. And the source explicitly notes this height range is strikingly similar to the extraterrestrials portrayed in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It speculates that maybe the film's consultant, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, had access to these kinds of reports.
Ah, so the source makes that specific connection to the film. Interesting.
It does. Von Papen described their faces as very white. They wore shiny, black, one-piece outfits. Soft material, no pockets, soft shoes too, but here's a key detail from his alleged account. Their hands.
What about the hands?
He described them as very human-like. Soft, like children's hands, 5 digits, normal joints, neat fingernails.
5 fingers. Human-like hands. That's different from some other descriptions you hear.
It is. That's a significant point of potential contradiction, we'll see. Von Papen also mentioned seeing cables made of unfamiliar metals and plastic sheets with symbols on the control board and floor. He estimated the craft was about 30 feet across, the interior cabin maybe 20 feet.
Okay, so Von Papen's account gives us 5-fingered, human-like hands. Remember that.
Definitely. Because the source then brings in information compiled by a longtime UFO investigator, Len Stringfield. He reportedly spoke over many years with various medical informants, doctors, medical technicians, people allegedly summoned by government agencies starting in the early 1950s and ongoing, who were involved in autopsies.
Autopsies, happening years after the supposed 1947 crash.
That's what Stringfield sources, as cited in this book, claimed. They alleged the bodies were preserved, maybe in formaldehyde, between examinations over the years. These medical informants supposedly gave Stringfield a kind of composite description based on what they collectively saw.
Okay, what is that composite description from these alleged medical sources? It sounds like it might be quite detailed.
It is approximate height, 3.5 to 4.5 feet. Head, definitely oversized relative to the body, suggesting maybe a larger brain capacity. Body and head.
Yeah.
Hairless, maybe just a little bit of slight fuzz on the scalp. Eyes, large, deep set or sunken, set far apart, and slightly slanted.
Slanted eyes is a detail we heard before.
Yes. Ears, no lobes. Nose, kind of formless, just a slight bump with nostrils. Mouth, a small slit, maybe not even used for eating like we do. No mention of teeth in this composite. Neck, thin. Arms and legs, extremely thin, with the arms reaching almost down to the knees.
Very thin, long arms.
Okay.
And the hands in this description.
This is where it differs significantly from Von Papen's account. This composite describes hands with 4 fingers and no thumb. Or maybe a long first finger that acted like a thumb. 2 of the fingers were apparently double the length of the others, elongated fingernails, and slight webbing between the fingers.
4 fingers, 2 much longer, webbed. That is a very specific, very non-human detail, and it directly contradicts the five-fingered account.
It's a clear difference, yeah. And the source actually addresses this inconsistency. It speculates maybe Stringfield's informants were lower-level personnel, or maybe someone misremembered or miscounted, if a long first finger was folded over a thumb-like part. It tries to find ways these differing accounts might still fit.
Interesting that the source acknowledges and tries to reconcile the discrepancies itself. What other descriptions are mentioned?
The source mentions a JK, supposedly an intelligence officer at Wright-Patterson Field, who personally saw 9 bodies there, kept in deep freeze. He described them as short, about 4 feet tall, with grayish skin. And he said he heard rumors there were actually over 30 bodies stored at the base.
Over 30 bodies. The numbers in these alleged accounts just keep growing.
That's what JK reportedly heard, yeah. Then there's an account from a soldier. He was on a train in 1952, claimed he was transporting bodies recovered from Aztec, New Mexico. That's another alleged crash site, sometimes linked into these narratives, moving them to Fort Riley, Kansas.
What did this soldier claim to see?
He said he saw 16 or so bodies, very small, all dressed alike in some kind of stretch garment. His description included human features and specifically mentioned teeth. Skin was yellowish, and he described it as fuzzy like a peach. He also thought they looked male and female, had bumps in the right places, as he put it.
Okay, so that account differs again. Includes teeth, male-female characteristics, fuzzy skin. It really highlights the inconsistencies, doesn't it?
It definitely shows the challenge in getting one single consistent picture, especially from anonymous sources years later, as the source itself notes. One last one mentioned is an unidentified nurse or medical technician claimed to have worked at a base, saw 2 bodies, 4 to 5 feet tall, preserved in some chemical solution. Human-like features, but again, proportionally large heads and slanted eyes.
The large head and slanted eyes seem to be fairly recurring themes across several of these alleged accounts, despite other differences.
They do seem to pop up more often, and as you pointed out earlier, the source explicitly makes that link between these descriptions, especially the 4-fingered composite from Stringfield's informants and the aliens in Close Encounters, speculating again that Hynek must have had access to similar classified reports.
So putting it all together, according to these various sources compiled in the book, there are multiple alleged witnesses and internal accounts describing the recovery of non-human bodies alongside highly unusual craft materials. But the details, especially about the bodies, they vary quite a bit.
That's the complex picture being built, yes. And these alleged recoveries, according to the book, were immediately followed by extensive, decades-long efforts to keep it all secret and control the information.
Right. Let's follow that alleged trail. Where did all this recovered material and these alleged bodies supposedly end up, according to the sources cited in this book?
Okay, the source tries to trace the alleged movement. The material from the Brazil ranch debris field, the stuff Marcel initially handled, was reportedly flown from Roswell Army Air Base to General Rainey's headquarters at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. Marcel went initially, but then someone else apparently took over transporting it.
Okay, Fort Worth first. Then where?
From Fort Worth, it was allegedly sent on to Wright-Patterson Field, now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. That was supposedly for further analysis. The source emphasizes that only the really unusual wreckage went this route, not the balloon stuff shown to the press.
Wright-Patterson. That base comes up a lot in UFO lore. And what about the disc and occupants from the other alleged crash site near Socorro, the one Barnett supposedly saw?
The source suggests that Hall, the main craft, and its occupants went somewhere else initially, to Muroc Air Force Base in California, which later became Edwards Air Force Base.
Edwards AFB. Okay, so potentially 2 different recoveries going to 2 different high-security locations initially.
That's one theory presented in the book based on the information gathered. Then, the source mentions rumors of later consolidation, claims that maybe the bodies and some key wreckage were eventually brought together under one roof back at Wright-Patterson sometime in the mid-1950s, specifically in a place referred to as Building 18A, Area B.
Building 18A. Has anyone ever confirmed that building exists or existed?
Well, the source points out that when people ask for official information about Building 18A, the usual response is that no such building exists or ever existed at Wright-Patterson, which, of course, the book presents as just another layer of the alleged secrecy.
Right. Convenient denial.
The source also mentions even later rumors that perhaps in early 1978, maybe because public pressure was increasing through things like the Freedom of Information Act, the preserved bodies and some wreckage were moved again, supposedly via a huge Guppy transport aircraft to a specially built, highly guarded warehouse on the CIA compound at Langley, Virginia,
Langley, wow.
while other remaining material was shipped off to MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. These are later rumors cited in the source, of course.
So, according to these claims and rumors compiled by the source, this material and the alleged bodies were shuffled around multiple times over decades, always under extreme security, potentially ending up at the heart of the intelligence community or other secure bases.
That's the alleged movement pattern described in the book, yes, based on these anonymous sources and rumors. And the source details the various methods allegedly used to maintain this intense secrecy all along the way.
Like what? We've heard some already.
Right. Orders to silence witnesses, we saw that with Barnett and Brazel, and it allegedly extended to all military personnel involved, like patriotic duty line.
Yeah, the patriotic duty to shut up.
Official denials and cover stories. The weather balloon for Roswell is the classic. The source also mentions the chicken bone tooth story used as a cover for President Eisenhower's alleged sudden trip in 1954.
We'll get to that one.
Media censorship. We talked about Lydia Sleppy's teletype being cut, W.E. Whitmore Sr.'s radio station supposedly being threatened by the FCC and a senator.
That level of pressure on the media, if true, coming from those levels, it's hard to fathom unless the stakes were perceived as incredibly high.
The source certainly suggests they were perceived that way. It also mentions the convenient transfer or sometimes disappearance of key personnel linked to the original Roswell incident.
Like who?
Lieutenant Louis Bohannon, he was head of the photo lab at Roswell, transferred less than 2 weeks after the event. Lieutenant Colonel Payne Jennings, who was temporarily commanding the base when it happened, he later disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on a flight that Major Marcel was supposed to be on, but luckily missed.
Whoa, okay.
And Major Marcel himself suddenly transferred to Washington, D.C. just 3 months after Roswell, apparently over his own commander's objections.
So people directly involved were quickly moved out of the picture, or in one case, vanished under mysterious circumstances.
That's how the source presents these events. It also suggests the use of what it calls gray propaganda.
Gray propaganda? What's that?
Basically, subtly supporting or allowing inaccurate or easily debunked stories to circulate. Like Frank Scully's 1950 book, Behind the Flying Saucers. It made some wild claims that were later discredited. The idea is if you let flaky stories gain attention, it makes the entire subject look unreliable and easier to dismiss.
Muddy the waters with bad info.
Exactly. Or creating public projects that look similar but are designed to fail as a cover. The source mentions the AVRO car, that Canadian-American attempt to build a flying saucer aircraft in the 50s.
Yeah, that thing never really flew properly.
Right. The source cites someone allegedly involved claiming the whole AVRO project was basically a deliberate public distraction, a cover, while the Air Force was secretly testing real captured non-earthly hardware behind the scenes.
So if you're secretly working on captured tech, you create a noisy public failure that looks kind of similar to throw people off the scent. Clever, if true.
That's the suggestion made in the book, yes.
And what about official documents? You mentioned Freedom of Information Act lawsuits.
Right. Groups like Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, CAUS, and Ground Saucer Watch, GSW, sued the CIA under FOIA back in the 70s. The source notes that in 1978, the CIA claimed it had located about 10,000 pages of relevant UFO documents, but they only released less than 900.
Less than 10%. What about the rest?
Crucially, they refused to release 57 specific documents citing national security exemptions. 57 documents deemed too sensitive for public release, even decades later.
57 specific documents withheld. That number really stands out, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The source also highlights what it presents as contradictions in the FBI's official stance over the years. It shows internal FBI memos from 1947 instructing agents to investigate sightings, notify the military, notify the Bureau. There's even a specific FBI teletype from July 8, 1947 about the Roswell recovery, noting that Wright Field hadn't yet confirmed the weather balloon story Ramy was putting out.
So internally, the FBI was involved right from the start.
That's what these memos cited suggest. Yet the source contrasts this with public letters signed by J. Edgar Hoover himself years later, stating flatly, "For your information, the investigation of unidentified flying objects is not and never has been a matter that is within the investigative jurisdiction of the FBI."
Wow. So internal instructions and activity directly contradicted by later public denials from the very top. The source presents that as pretty clear evidence of a cover-up within the FBI itself.
That's the argument being made, yes. That the FBI's early documented involvement was later deliberately erased from the public record. The source also brings in evidence of alleged high-level awareness of the reality alongside the secrecy.
Like what?
It quotes the Twining memo, General Nathan Twining, head of Air Material Command at Wright-Patterson back then. In September 1947, just months after Roswell, he wrote an internal memo stating, quote, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious."
Real, not fictitious. That's pretty direct internally.
Very direct. He noted the objects were likely disc-shaped, silent, metallic, capable of extreme rates of climb and maneuverability, suggesting intelligent control. This indicates, according to the source, that top military brass privately accepted the reality of the phenomenon very soon after the Roswell incident, even while the public story was weather balloon.
That internal memo, confirming reality just weeks after the public denial, that's a really significant point the source makes.
It shows, according to the book, a clear disconnect between internal assessment and public posture at a very high level. Then there's the Canadian memo, from a Wilbert B. Smith, senior radio engineer for the Canadian government, in 1950.
What did that say?
Smith wrote that, based on discrete inquiries made through the Canadian embassy in Washington, he learned the subject of flying saucers was, quote, "the most highly classified subject in the U.S. government, rating higher even than the H-bomb."
Higher classification than the H-bomb. That phrase from the source really hammers home the alleged level of secrecy.
It certainly does. Smith also reported being told that a small group, headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush, was secretly studying it.
Vannevar Bush, a top science administrator during the war.
Okay.
Then there's the alleged Eisenhower viewing. This is a big one in the lore. The source discusses the rumors around President Eisenhower's sudden, unexplained absence from his vacation in Palm Springs, California in February 1954. Right, the official story was emergency dental work.
The famous chipped a tooth on a chicken bone story, as the source calls it.
The chicken bone tooth. Got it.
Yes. The source contrasts this official explanation with other accounts, like a letter written by a man named Gerald Light to Meade Lane. Light claimed he was part of a group of prominent citizens, scientists, business leaders, clergy who were secretly taken to Edwards Air Force Base during Ike's dental emergency.
Taken to Edwards. Why?
To view recovered alien craft and possibly bodies, Light's letter, quoted in the source, describes seeing multiple types of other plane aeroforms and, more disturbingly, observing the reaction of the experts and military officials who were shown this reality. He wrote about seeing human reactions of realization, ranging from complete collapse to shedding tears. He said, "Strong minds cringe before totally irreconcilable aspects of science."
Wow, strong minds cringe. That's a powerful image of the alleged impact of this revelation on insiders.
Yeah, it is. And the source suggests that witnessing this level of panic, this intellectual and emotional breakdown among leading scientists and military figures, might have been the very thing that convinced the forces of secrecy, as they're called, that humanity just wasn't ready, that public disclosure would be too destabilizing.
So even if Eisenhower himself might have wanted to tell people, seeing that reaction could have strengthened the resolve of those enforcing the secrecy.
That's the compelling implication drawn from these sources by the authors, that the cover-up might not have been just about hiding hardware, but about managing the perceived catastrophic societal and psychological impact of revealing something so profoundly outside known human experience. The material presents this consistent alleged pattern: high-level knowledge coupled with deliberate, multifaceted suppression of that knowledge spanning decades, using everything from witness intimidation to sophisticated disinformation.
It's a really complex and frankly unsettling narrative the source builds. Layering the alleged Socorro crash site and those detailed body descriptions onto the initial Roswell debris story, and then weaving in these extensive claims of cover-up and high-level involvement.
But the source doesn't stop there, does it? It connects this whole thing to broader implications, other incidents around the world.
That's right. It widens the lens a bit towards the end. It briefly mentions, for instance, the Lake Onega incident in the USSR back in 1961. The source notes it had some intriguing alleged similarities to the Roswell debris scenario.
Similar how?
Reports described an unknown object seen near the ground, then some kind of collision or impact that caused damage to the ground and lake ice. Metallic debris and foil-like material were found. Witnesses reported no sound before the impact, just the impact itself. And apparently the object itself wasn't destroyed. It seemed to survive and continue on.
So, a Russian event with echoes of the Brazil Ranch debris field, part of Roswell, strange materials found after an impact. With some striking parallels in the type of event and the debris description, yes, according to the source material. It notes that analysis of the materials found there reportedly identified an unknown organic fiber and a silicon iron alloy that was highly resistant to heat and acid.
Advanced materials found there, too.
And it quotes Soviet scientists who were involved. Professor Sharonov concluded it wasn't a meteorite, it was artificial. Professor Ziegel called it a space probe. Professor Kazantsev stated it was obviously a space probe.
That's fascinating. According to this book, the Soviet scientists seemed maybe more willing or able to publicly conclude an artificial non-meteorite origin compared to the immediate official U.S. reaction to Roswell, which was weather balloon.
The source does note a difference in how the news got out. In the USSR, apparently, some info leaked through illegal underground publications, samizdat, before any semi-official report appeared. Whereas Roswell had that immediate widespread press coverage, followed by the swift official clampdown and censorship in the U.S. So, the information control methods might have differed, but the alleged core phenomenon described bore similarities.
And the source expands the scope even further, right?
Yeah.
Mentioning alleged sightings of structures on the moon.
Yes, it touches on that briefly. Details presented in the source include reports from U.S. and Soviet astronauts or analysis of probe imagery, allegedly showing things like walls, domes, bridges, spire-like objects, even pyramids, and geometric arrangements of stones on the lunar surface. One Soviet scientist apparently speculated some features could be flight markers for a lunar runway.
Runways on the moon.
And reports of a tower-like formation, a gigantic antenna of improbable height. These are claims reported in the source material.
Structures on the moon. That takes the idea way beyond just brief visits. It hints at potential long-term presence or construction activity somewhere else in our solar system.
That's the potential implication the source raises, yes. It also explicitly circles back and connects the overall increase in UFO sightings, particularly since 1947, to the dawn of our atomic age. It calls it the end of cosmic isolation.
Meaning?
The source strongly suggests that UFOs, whatever they are, might be specifically observing human nuclear development. It points again to the clustering of sightings around advanced research facilities, missile bases, space launch centers, areas linked to atomic power and rocketry.
So the argument presented is that humanity splitting the atom basically put us on somebody else's radar. Drew potentially unwanted attention.
That's the theory put forward in this material, yes. And the source highlights what it sees as a significant ongoing danger stemming from the alleged continued secrecy surrounding the phenomenon.
What danger specifically?
It warns that if a UFO were to malfunction over sensitive territory, or maybe even take what could be seen as retaliatory action if fired upon, and if its existence is not officially acknowledged, well, it could easily be misinterpreted by nations.
Misinterpreted how?
As an attack from a hostile human adversary. A sneak attack by Russia or China or the U.S., depending on where it happens. And in a nuclear-armed world, that kind of misidentification could potentially trigger a devastating conflict. Accidental nuclear war started by misinterpreting an unknown.
That's a terrifying thought. Misidentifying something non-earthly as a hostile act from another nation could have absolutely catastrophic global consequences.
Exactly. And for this reason, the source emphasizes what it sees as a critical need for nations to finally overcome the secrecy, to share information openly about UFOs and related space activities, to prevent that kind of catastrophic mistake.
There's a definite sense of urgency the source leaves you with on that point. It's not just about historical curiosity.
The book certainly presents it that way as a matter of current global security. And it includes a quote attributed to Wernher von Braun, the famous rocket scientist, that seems to kind of encapsulate the whole situation as presented in this material.
What did von Braun supposedly say?
It is as impossible to confirm them in the present as it will be to deny them in the future.
As impossible to confirm in the present as it will be to deny in the future. That's a really powerful thought to reflect on, especially after hearing all these claims of decades of alleged secrecy and denial.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it, to the difficulty of providing absolute, irrefutable public proof right now versus the sheer persistence of the claims, the volume of alleged evidence presented in sources like this, and the possibility that, well, maybe future events or discoveries will make their reality undeniable.
Okay. Wow. We have certainly taken a deep dive through the specific sources you provided us with today. We've navigated those alleged historical reports predating 1947, explored the apparently very busy skies over New Mexico in the summer of 47. We detailed the initial Roswell debris recovery story, the incredibly swift retraction, and the extensive alleged cover-up. We delved into the claims of that second crash site near Socorro, complete with alleged non-human occupants.
The Barnett story, yeah.
Compiled those sometimes conflicting descriptions of the occupants and their craft, traced the alleged decades-long shell game of moving the material and maintaining secrecy, and finally touched on the broader implications and other incidents presented in this material.
And it's crucial to reiterate, we've done all of this strictly by presenting the information, the claims, the witness accounts as they are found within the pages of these specific sources you shared. We've aimed to extract what the authors themselves frame as the most important nuggets from their research.
Absolutely. That's the key here. This was about unpacking this particular material for you, the listener. So, having gone through this journey, wrestled with these claims, here's a final provocative thought presented by the source material itself. Something for you to mull over.
Yeah, the source material kind of ends by turning the spotlight back onto us, onto humanity. It poses a question. Given the dangers we demonstrably pose to ourselves, nuclear weapons, environmental damage, our capacity for self-destruction, the question is raised. Are these alleged UFOs primarily a danger to us? Or could they possibly be part of some larger design, maybe even a message?
A message, the source hints, that perhaps needs to become clear now. While there's still time for humanity to understand it, maybe change course, given our own self-inflicted perils.
It really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? Away from automatically assuming any visitors must be hostile invaders, perhaps mirroring our own worst impulses towards the possibility that their alleged presence, if real, might somehow be linked to this critical dangers point humanity has reached in its own development.
So what does all this mean for you? It means you now have a comprehensive look at the specific claims, the alleged evidence, the witness accounts, and the overarching narratives presented in this particular source material. You can take this information, weigh the details it provides, the consistencies, the contradictions, and draw your own conclusions based on this deep dive into these pages.
That's exactly the goal, to provide you with an informed perspective drawn directly from the material itself so you can think about it critically.
Well, thanks for joining us on this fascinating and sometimes, gotta say, pretty wild exploration through these sources. We really hope this deep dive has been valuable for you.